I'm John Veneri for Catholic Family News. This is CFN Media. Michael Voris of Church Militant TV has just released yet another attack on the Society of St. Pius X because he objects to the SSPX telling people that they should avoid the new Mass. Now, I'll give you a little more details of what the SSPX says in a little bit, but I want to say from the beginning that I believe that Mr. Voris's outrage is misplaced. I think it would be much more beneficial for all intended, for him and for others like him, to ask the crucial questions regarding the imposition of the new Mass in the first place. This new Mass is something that Cardinal Ratzinger called a banal, on-the-spot fabrication. Because when we look at the new Mass, we see it is a revolutionary, ecumenical operation unlike anything that we've ever seen before in church history. And I want to demonstrate this by partially demonstrate it, by starting with four quotations, okay? First, I'm going to quote the progressivist Father Gregory Baum, Commonweal Magazine, January 18th, 1963. He's writing at the close of Vatican II's first session. This was the session where the decree on the liturgy was passed. Here's what he says. I'll listen to this. Quote, "The result of the voting during the last days was amazing and almost incomprehensible. Despite the considerable opposition at the beginning, all but 14 fathers voted in favor of a document on the liturgy which, while guarding unity," so he says, this is a crucial point, "will once and for all destroy the uniformity of the Roman Rite." Close quote. Second, John Mormon, the Anglican so-called Bishop of Yorkshire, England. He was a Protestant observer at Vatican II, and he wrote this again at the time of the Council. He's thrilled with Vatican II's decree on the liturgy. Here's what he says, quote, "When I read the Vatican II schema on the liturgy, I realize that many of the proposals which were put forth before the Council were in fact points which we Anglicans accepted 400 years ago. In reading the schema on the liturgy, I could not help but thinking that if the Church of Rome were to carry out all the reforms proposed, they would one day find they had triumphantly invented the Book of Common Prayer." Close quote. As I think you know, the Book of Common Prayer is the official prayer book for Anglicans, not Catholics. Okay. Number three, Monsignor Joseph Clifford Fenton, one of the most eminent Thomistic theologians of the United States at the time of the Council, one of the last anti-modernist theologians we had. Here's what he wrote in his personal diary, October 19th, 1962, again, at the time of the Council. I started to read the Council's material on the liturgy, and I was shocked at the bad theology. They are actually stupid enough to speak of the church working until there be one fold and one shepherd, as if that condition were not already achieved." Close quote. And fourthly, Archbishop Annibale Bugnini. He said in a book published in 1966, he said that the purpose of Vatican II's Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy was to, quote, "usher in the boldest and most fundamental liturgical reform of all time," close quote. Now, these four quotes, and I could give more, but these four quotes were stated at the time of the Council. None of these men had to wait until 1969 to recognize the fact that Vatican II's liturgical reform would usher in an upheaval, a liturgical revolution, a movement that will, again quoting Baum, will once and for all destroy the uniformity of the Roman Rite. And this revolution is apparent in the Council documents themselves. Many of the bishops at the time were not aware that this type of manipulation in the document was going on. But anyway, this is one of the many reasons we can say that the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Missae, was never intended to be a true representation of the Catholic theology of the Mass as codified in the Council of Trent. It was designed to be a revolution. It was intended to be a liturgy to serve the new movement of pan-Christian ecumenism. Because in ecumenism, what do you have to do? You have to deal with Protestants. Protestants, what do we find? They reject the sacrificial nature of the Mass. Protestants reject the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Protestants reject the sacrament of holy orders, wherein the priest is given the power of Jesus Christ to forgive sin and to offer sacrifice of the Mass. And the new Mass was designed in such a way to accommodate these Protestant rejections of key elements of the Catholic faith. Now, of course, the Protestant orientation of the new Mass is well known. It's extensively documented. The traditional Catholics have been talking about it for more than 40 years. There was an ecumenical intention from the beginning. Along with the quotations I just mentioned, we have the testimony of journalist Jean Gouton, a close friend and confidant of Paul VI. And he confirmed that it was the direct aim of Paul VI to Protestantize the liturgy. In a radio interview of the 1990s, this was reported in Christian Order, Gouton said, quote, "The intention of Paul VI with regard to what is commonly called the Mass was to reform the Catholic liturgy in such a way that it should almost coincide with the Protestant liturgy. But what is curious is that Paul VI did that to get as close as possible to the Protestant Lord's Supper. There was with Paul VI an ecumenical intention to remove, or at least to correct, or at least to relax what was too Catholic in the traditional sense in the Mass, and I repeat, to get the Catholic Mass closer to the Calvinist liturgy." That's a direct quote from Jean Gouton, close friend and confidant of Paul VI. And of course, we have the Protestants themselves rejoicing over this Protestantized new liturgy. Professor M.G. Siegwald, Siegwald, I think that's how you say it. He's a Protestant professor of dogmatic theology in the faculty of Strasbourg. He said in 1969, just as the new Mass was being rolled out, he said, quote, "Nothing in the renewed Catholic Mass need really trouble the evangelical Protestants." Those points of Catholic doctrine in the Mass were washed away. Then, of course, there is the Ottaviani intervention, which was the critical study of the new Mass by Cardinal Ottaviani and the Roman theologians. From the very beginning, these prelates, these good theologians, sounded the alarm against the Protestant nature of the Novus Ordo. Cardinals Ottaviani and Bacci, in their famous letter to Pope Paul VI, June 5th, 1969, it was a letter that accompanied the critical study. It said, and I'm quoting now, that the new Mass, quote, "represents in its whole and in its details a striking departure from the theology of the Mass as it was formulated by Session 22 of the Council of Trent. The canons of the rite definitively fixed at that time erected an insurmountable barrier against any heresy which might attack the integrity of the mystery." Now, the critical study goes on to spotlight the many deficiencies inherent in the new Mass, especially the Protestant orientation of this new liturgy. Here are some of the defects they noted. Omissions of elements emphasizing the Catholic teaching that the Mass makes satisfaction for sin, and this is a teaching that is rejected, abhorrent to Protestants. The reduction of the priest's role to a position approximating that of a Protestant minister. Implicit denials of Christ's real presence and the doctrine of transubstantiation. Again, this is all laid out in the critical study. I'm just giving you the bullet points. The change of the consecration from a sacramental action into a mere narrative retelling the story of the Last Supper. The fragmentation of the Church's unity of belief through the introduction of countless options. Ambiguous language and equivocation through the rite, which compromises the Church's doctrine. And that's not all. The study goes on to say, quote, "It is obvious that the Novus Ordo obsessively emphasizes supper and memorial instead of the unbloody renewal of the sacrifice of the cross." The study points out that in the new Mass, the central role of the real presence has been suppressed. Again, this is an appeal to Protestantism, or pleasing to Protestants. The study accurately notes that the new Mass has much to gladden the heart of the most modernist Protestant. Close quote. Now, this solid critique dealt with the new Mass in the original Latin. In other words, in its purest form. They're not even talking about the multitude of abuses that would follow, although the critical study did foresee that abuses would follow. So anyway, this is the reason why I never attend the new Mass. The new Mass, and it's demonstrable, the new Mass was not constructed to worship the true God of the Catholic faith, but rather it was constructed to serve the false god of a modernist ecumenism, always condemned by Catholicism, a bogus ecumenism that is gripping the minds of the highest members of the Church during our present period of chaos. And what's interesting, the critical study tells us that we must make a choice. Here's what the critical study says towards the end. Quote, "It is obvious that the new order of Mass has no intention of presenting the faith taught by the Council of Trent. But it is to this faith that the Catholic conscience is bound forever. Thus, with the promulgation of the new order of Mass, the true Catholic is faced with a tragic need to choose." Close quote. And many of us choose to have nothing to do with this new ecumenical liturgy, which would not be recognized by Catholic, which would not be recognized as Catholic, rather, by any of the popes prior to Vatican II. This is extremely serious, and it is the church leaders themselves that have put us in this dilemma, that have put us in a situation where, as the theologians say, we have to choose. And different individuals and different groups will have different ways of responding. The Society of St. Pius X recommends that Catholics who understand the gravity of the situation avoid the new Mass altogether, even if it means staying home and reading the Mass in your missal. Now, a Catholic is free to think what he wants about that recommendation. I personally never tell anyone, don't go to the new Mass, in the sense that as a layperson I can tell a fellow Catholic what to do in this regard. What I do is I say that I never attend the new Mass. I never attend it, and here's my reasons, and some of the reasons you heard already in this video. So, before Voris or anyone else gets all wrapped around a pole regarding the SSPX's manner of dealing with the new Mass, I think it would be more beneficial for Voris to publicly question again and again and again, with the same frequency, with the same passion that he constantly attacks the Society of St. Pius X, question Vatican officials over and over again publicly why they have given us, abusing their authority, why they have given us a Protestantized liturgy in the first place where we are forced to make a choice. Why have they given us this new liturgy that, in the words of Cardinal Ottaviani and Bacci, represent in its whole and its details a striking departure from the Catholic theology of the Mass as codified by the Council of Trent? And I would respectfully argue that we are not bound, no matter who promotes it, to blindly accept a liturgical revolution that, in the celebratory words of the modernist Father Gregory Baum at the time of the Council, a revolution that will, quote, once and for all destroy the uniformity of the Roman Rite. For Catholic Family News, CFN Media, I'm John Veneri. See you next time.